I mean, you know, we've got citizens in this town who did something out of the norm.
Oh, yeah.
And it started with World War II veterans thinking that, you know, every day they're getting thinner and thinner.
You bet.
But we decided to expand and get everybody, because everybody's got a valid story to tell, whether they were in combat, not in combat. You know, you lived through military experience, whatever that was. It's, you know, it's valid. So what we're trying to do is get, you know, maybe a half an hour, 45 minutes
Okay.
to tell your story. My role is really just to try to keep you on some kind of track. I'm not leading you one way or another. It's your story, and we'd like to hear what you have to say, what you think is important, so that's where we are. So just to start off, if you can state your name, age, and you know when you served, where you served.
My name is Jim Roskoph. I'm 74 years old. I served in the U.S. Navy from 1956 to 1978. I was originally born in Cleveland, Ohio. I left home when I was 18 and I never returned, only to visit. My naval experience after training, boot camp. Actually, I went through boot camp 2 times. In 1956, I joined the Naval Reserves in my senior year in high school. And they had a program then in the summer when you got out of school, they would send you to boot camp for 3 months. So I went to boot camp for 3 months. This was after graduation. After I came back, I got a job working in a department store shipping place, and I kind of got the idea that it was a dead-end position. So I decided after seeing Jack Webb in the DI that I was going to go down and join the Marine Corps. So I went down to the Marine recruiting office. I took the test, the Armed Forces entrance test, and I did very well. So I also got a call from a Navy recruiter. So after some soul searching for probably about 10 minutes, because I was a young kid, I went back and talked with the Navy recruiter. And that time they were forming an all-Ohio company to go to boot camp in the Navy. So they wanted me to be in that company, and I told them, well, I had already been to boot camp once. Well, they said it wouldn't hurt you to go through a second time. So actually I went through boot training twice.
Same place?
Same place, Great Lakes, Illinois. Okay. First time I went in the summer, and the second time I went in the winter, and I got to shovel like 2 or 3 foot of snow every week or so, and that's part of my training, I guess. But anyway, after boot camp, I attended Class A engineman school as an engineering rate mechanic. And then I got assigned to the U.S.S. Bushnell in Key West, Florida. It's a submarine tender. At that time, there was about 10,000 sailors in Key West. There was 2 submarine squadrons, there was 2 destroyer squadrons, a couple of rescue ships, and aviation rescue boat. I spent approximately 2 years in Key West, and then I went to another submarine tender in Charleston, South Carolina, and I spent about 1.5 years there, and that's where I actually met my wife. We had a little thing that we would go out partying on the weekend, and on Sunday we were usually out of money, and the U.S.O. had free dinners, so we would go to the U.S.O. at night for dinners, and then they had a little canteen thing afterwards where you dance, and that's where I met my wife, and we got married in 1961.
And she's from North Carolina?
South Carolina.
South Carolina.
Charleston. And she was there with the church group serving the evening meal, and I kind of took a shine to her, so I pursued her heavily. At first she wasn't really that interested, but after a while she found out I was really a nice guy after all, so we got married.
So what kind, and you were on a submarine tender at this
Yeah,
point?
I was working in the engine room on the ship itself at that time. When I left, that was the U.S.S. Gilmore. When I left the Gilmore, I went to a pre-commissioning detail in Pascagoula, Mississippi to put a 3rd submarine tender in commission. I also attended a school in New London for repairs to the auxiliary systems and nuclear systems on the FBM submarines and fast attack submarines. When I reported to the pre-commissioning detail, they put me in the ship's company rather than the repair department, and I was in what they call the auxiliary gang. We took care of all the air conditioning, refrigeration, all the auxiliary equipment on the ship, water coolers, everything, galley equipment, and we also had the operation of the missile crane and maintenance, which was a pretty interesting thing because you could move the crane an inch in any direction, because what they did is the crane came out over the ship, over the submarine with the missile. You take it down and then they drop it into the tube, close the tube up. These were vertical missiles. After about a year in ship's company, they transferred in the repair department, and I worked on nuclear and fast attack submarines for about a year and a half before I left that command. That was pretty interesting. I've worked inside a missile tube with the missile overhead, and one time we worked 72 hours straight when one of the submarines damaged its navigation periscope. So it was pretty stressful, and we were actually working 12 and 12. We were stationed in Rota, Spain, which was interesting. I lived in town. My wife and my daughter was there.
Young daughter.
Yeah, she was a couple years old, and we had a maid for $5 a week. It was a good tour.
Is this on the south of Spain or the
Yeah, it's on the Gulf of Cadiz. It's a Rota Naval Base. It's actually a Spanish naval base. We were tied up there. We did a thing called a med moor, where the ship is moored astern to the pier instead of alongside the pier. That gives the ability of submarines to come along both sides of the ship. I also was involved with the oxygen-nitrogen plant we had on the ship, which produced both liquid and oxygen and nitrogen, and we transferred that to submarines too.
So this is in the late 50s?
This was in the early 60s.
Early 60s?
Yeah.
So we're in the heart of the Cold War.
Yeah, our main mission was to support the submarines. The submarines were involved in the surveillances and all of the things that were going on with the Cold War at that time.
But there's no combat.
No combat at that time. No. When I left Holland, I went to command at Mare Island Naval Shipyard, and I was chief engineer on a yard tug. And our main job there was to assist in they were building submarines in Mare Island at that time, nuclear submarines. And our job was we'd catch them on coming off the ways. We moved a lot of ammunition ships because right about that time, the Vietnam War was starting to escalate a lot, and there was a lot of, most everything going to Vietnam, like weapons and ammunitions, and that was transported by ship. A lot of people don't know that. Also, there was a large dead fleet in Suisun, California. It was right up the Sacramento River from us. And a lot of those old merchant ships were being recommissioned to be able to support the Vietnam effort. So we pulled a lot of those out. It was good duty. It was supposed to be shore duty, but I probably spent just about every day on the water still. And it was good. In one part of that tour, I got to be the cook for the submarine. Our cook got fired, and I got to cook for the guys, which was kind of a new experience for me. And the Navy has, at that time, had standard recipes. And on Tuesday, everybody in the Navy ate the same meals, breakfast, lunch, and supper. Wednesday, same thing. Every day, everything was the same. Once in a while, like on a holiday, you get a special meal. But if you went anywhere in the Navy on a Monday, you get the same meal, any base, any ship, anything, anytime. So it was kind of a new experience. I had a good time on there. I left Mare Island in 1967 and went to what they called the Naval Inshore Operations Training Center for training to prepare to go to Vietnam as part of the mobile. At that time, it was a river patrol force. My assignment was to a support ship. These were LSTs converted from the Second World War, and their job was to support the patrol craft that were patrolling the rivers at that time. Most of the action then was in the large rivers. When I say large, they're big rivers, the Mekong, Bassac, things like that. I was there for TET in '68.
Well, you weren't taking an LST up those rivers,
Sure.
were you? Oh, you were?
Oh, sure. And I was there in TET. During TET, we actually provided fire support for in a town called Vin Long. The town had been overrun, and the only people that had remained in their place were the SEALs. They had a compound over there, and they maintained their compound during that whole time. And we provided fire support for the Vietnamese Army and the river patrol boats that were attached to our ship. I spent 12 months on there, actually. I was in charge of the maintenance operation. We had 6 people. We provided the supervision and the maintenance capability. We could lift the boat, take the engines out if it needed to be. We did hull repairs, patched holes. They were fiberglass boats, 31 foot long, river patrol force. I stayed there 14 months. I received the Navy Commendation Medal for my what I considered my job during the Tet Offensive with the Combat V. We used to go out on patrol sometimes with the guys because it gets a little boring after a while. And I had a bunch of young kids. I was like probably the 3rd oldest person on the ship. Had young officers. Lieutenant was in command, Lieutenant J.G. In fact, I got in trouble. We went to Subic for upkeep for 2 weeks, and we had a ship's party, and when the XO came up, I asked him for, me and this other chief were tending bar, and I asked the XO for his ID card, and he got a little upset with me. Mm-hmm. But it was a good ship, good command, very stressful, a lot of hours. And
did you sleep and eat on board, or?
Yeah, we slept and ate on the ship. We were assigned to the ship. When I left there, I came back to the U.S.S. Holland, which was another submarine tender, and I was an assistant division officer for auxiliaries and hull repair. And I spent a year on there, which was, when I came back, it just seemed something was missing. It's hard to explain. At that time, there was a lot of people who had no real combat experience in the military, Navy particularly. What they considered to be these major problems were, to me, kind of a, okay, we'll get it done thing, you know. And I got a little frustrated, so after about a year, let me regress. To go back, my wife got pregnant while I was on that tour. And, but after about a year, I decided that I was really just getting kind of frustrated. In fact, I was actually thinking about leaving the military. So I put in for another tour in Vietnam. I went back to the Naval Inshore Operations Training Center and went through they had a program going on that Nixon had instigated then. It was called OCTAL, Accelerated Turnover to the Vietnamese. We were doing exactly what they're doing now in Afghanistan. We were preparing them to take over our work. I went through 12 weeks of school there. I had 12 weeks of Vietnamese language training, 4 weeks of, because we didn't carry corpsmen, we had 4 weeks of medical, combat medicine, boat operations, small arms, patrol tactics. I went through SEER training. I don't know if you know what that is. That's escape and evasion training. They actually put you in a prisoner of war camp scenario for about 3 days. And the other 2 days is escape and evasion type stuff and pathfinding and things like that. It was pretty interesting. We actually had people fail out of that, which really amazed me.
Out of
SEER training, yeah. If you failed SEER training, you didn't go. They wouldn't. You failed out. You flunked out of the program. Most of the guys had a problem. They had these small boxes they stuffed you in and closed you up. A lot of people were claustrophobic and didn't know it, I guess, or had never been in that experience. Some of it was kind of actually comical, and you always had in the back of your mind that this is only a training exercise. You know, they bumped you around a little bit and did little things to you, but basically it was just to see how you would react. Mm-hmm. At that time I was a chief petty officer and I was a senior guy, so I took a lot of flack. We also went to small arms training at a reserve army base in California, where we learned about all the good things we would be dealing with, 50 caliber machine guns and heavy weapons, 105s, all that kind of good stuff.
So were you deployed again?
Yeah, I went back to Vietnam in February of 1970. I was with River Patrol Force. The River Squadron was 572. It was 10 boats. I was a patrol officer. When I went there, they had talked to me about going into the maintenance, and I told them I didn't want to do that anymore. I wanted to be a patrol officer, so I was a patrol officer. I had the responsibility for a 2-boat patrol. We patrolled about once every 3 days. I had about 99 patrol missions as a U.S. Navy patrol officer. Was involved in 10 firefights. Our main mission was interdiction. Did a lot of night ambushes, but what our main job was to keep the rivers open. And we didn't see these huge battles like they saw up north. Most of our stuff was little skirmishes. The explosive device of the day for the Viet Cong was what they call B-40s or B-50 rockets. I actually gave you a picture of the ones that we had captured. They were fired from homemade launchers that were actually tin cans wrapped with wire and fired electrically with flashlight batteries. They would put them out in the, at that river I was patrolling at that time was called Song Doc, the Ong Doc River. It was about 50 feet wide and ran, I don't know how many miles, long ways. At that time, it was all free fire zone, just about, except in the town of Song and Dock itself. That means if we got shot at, we could fire back without getting anybody's permission. We also had good support. We had a Navy helicopter squadron that supported us. It was 2 helicopters, Sea Wolves they called them. They operated off the land, and then when the repair ship came in, they would operate off the repair ship. And we had a lot of good support from the Air Force. And the Navy had the OV-10s. I don't know if you're familiar with them. They're close support aircraft. They can devastate. I got, on one patrol, we got picked up with we got hit with a couple rockets and some heavy machine gun fire. It was 51 caliber machine guns, which is about a 1/2-inch bullet. And it just happens that a pair of these OV-10s were patrolling our sector, and they heard the action going on over the radio between me and the control center, and they came up on the freak and asked if they could be of assistance, and we told them, yeah, sure. So we put some smoke on what we thought was the area, and in about 30 seconds the tree line was completely demolished. I mean, it was just really a devastating thing. We also had what they call monitors. They were part of the Mobile Riverine Force. Mobile Riverine Force was actually an amphibious force. It had monitors which were converted landing craft with 105s mounted on them. Some of them had flamethrowers, some of them had water cannons. They had minesweeping boats and that. We had a monitor attached to us, and he could put in either indirect or direct fire. And when he did indirect fire, he'd give him his coordinates, and the gunner's mate that was in charge of the gun would actually sit on the barrel with a compass, and that's how they would aim that thing. So we usually back off a little bit when they fired for us, because it wasn't always that accurate. It was effective, and that was what was important.
So as you're sailing up river, are you in the middle? Are you staying in the middle? Do you stay
Where?
to the sides? Don't you feel like you're just a target out there?
Well, when we went through tactics training, at that time they had what they call a racetrack. If you took fire, what they did is the boats went around in a circle like that. Well, that worked really good on those big rivers. Some of them areas we were in, I went up a couple canals a few times that you had to back the boats out. You couldn't even turn them around. So them kind of tactics didn't really work. After I got there, I went through like a 2-week training period when I went on a patrol with other patrol officers and kind of got broken in and learned the area and things like that. After I finished that and had my own patrol, one of the boat captains, we called him, his name was Carson, we called him Kit Carson, of course, right? Came up to me and said, I want to talk to you about something. And I said, okay. So we sat down and talked, and he said, you know, On this river, that tactic don't work. Why don't we try just to stay in place and just return fire? You have to understand now, we had, between the two boats, we had 6 50 caliber machine guns, 2 7.62 machine guns, which is a smaller round, actually it's a shoulder weapon. Plus, we had grenade launchers. We had a belt-fed grenade launcher. We had all of these hand small arms and everything. And when you're dealing with small force, if we were to run into a big crossing with an army trying to cross or something, that's different. But we were dealing with ambushes. And like I said, the IED of the day was those rockets. And the boats were tough. And what was really good is a lot of the ammunition they used was armor piercing, and it would go right through the boat, unless it hit an engine or a radio or some solid structure.
And non-explode.
Yeah, a lot of times they didn't, or a lot of times when they would put them out and the tide would come in, we had like a 7-foot tide, and you had a tidal area that was probably 8 to 10 foot from the bank out, mud flat, and they would set those things out there, and a lot of times the tide would come in and they would just explode. They wouldn't actually launch because they were in the water and they couldn't launch, so the rocket would actually explode. In fact, that was probably most of the time. When they used the handheld launchers, that was a different story. Then you had to react really quick.
So what was your job during a firefight? What did you do?
I coordinated everything. You had the full responsibility. You were probably a mile or two away from your home base, the hooches we lived in, and the control center. You had that responsibility. There was no one questioning your action. Okay? And you were in charge, and that was it. Most of the time I would ride, they had what they call a lead boat and a cover boat. Lead boat was the front boat and the cover boat was the back. I usually rode in the lead boat. Sometimes I would ride the cover boat if we had a new boat captain, just to make sure that it would be, check the guy out more than anything else. That was the biggest thing. When you operate with a small group like that, you have to have confidence in everybody you're operating with.
Sure.
You know?
How large was the crew on one of these boats?
4 men on each boat. 2 gunners. Forward gunner stayed in the turret. The early boats, the Mark 1s, which I gave you pictures of both kinds, the Mark 1s were, the turret was foot operated. In other words, you moved it around like this here by yourself. The front 50s, it was twin 50s, and they were manually fired. The second generation of boats, the Mark 2s, had electrically fired guns and had electrically operated turret on the front. The back mount was a single mount 50 with just a shrapnel shield in front of it. And the 7.62 could be moved to either side of the boat. They had, over the engines, they had 2 armors, sheet armor, and they had connections where you could hook that machine gun to it on either side. Same with the grenade launcher.
So you had a lot of firepower.
Yeah, we could devastate. We really did. And the real problem we had was to try to control the firepower. I hated to use the 50s at night because as soon as you shot them, you lost all your night vision.
Because of the...
Yeah, even with the flash arresters on them, you lost everything. I mean, you just couldn't see anything. In fact, I got chastised for not using them one time. Not chastised, I was just told I shouldn't fool around out there. That's what was said.
So you're still in touch with any of the crew members?
I went to one reunion, but what happened was it ended up with, and I took my wife actually, and ended up a bunch of guys sitting around in a room in a hotel, smoking cigarettes, drinking, and telling war stories. And that was the last one I went to. I still correspond with some of the guys, but I don't attend the reunion. That just didn't turn me on. You know. I think the biggest thing was when I was in the River Division. One time I was the oldest person there. I don't think what people realize about wars is that it's the young man. Okay, these are kids. We had kids 18 years old, a lot of draftees, and they went out and did their job every day, put their butts on the line. People don't realize that. But we had a good group. We had a lot of guys who were on, that kid Carson that had talked to me about changing the tactics, he was on a Stewart tour. And we had a lot of people with 2 and 3 Purple Hearts. I have a kind of a funny story. I got a Purple Heart. We were on a night ambush position, and we used to put out these things called patrol seismic intrusion devices. They were little sensors, and you could put them out about 50 yards, and you could actually track movement. You know, one of the main concerns, and it was probably not really that well justified, but a big concern was that they would attack the boat when it was sitting in a night ambush position, and once you were immobile, you were kind of sitting duck, really. We used to do a lot of the night ambushes. There was a couple of big swampy areas, mangrove swamps, and they were ideal to set up ambushes in because they couldn't see the outline of the boat. But the big problem was they had a lot of monkeys and other things in there, so they would activate these intrusion devices. So you had to kind of say, do I really want to shoot or don't I want to shoot? Okay? And that was really one of the problems. Well, anyway, we had this activation and we were shooting, and I got hit in the face with a piece of shrapnel. I don't know if it was theirs or ours. And later on, we did find some holes in the boat, so eventually I guess somebody was shooting back at us. But once that shooting starts, you really don't see a lot. You just kind of react. I got hit in the face with a piece of shrapnel, and there was a head up here under the eye, and it was bleeding pretty good. And this guy, his name was Jose Gonzalez. I still correspond with him sometimes. On the boat, we had battle dressings. I don't know if you're familiar with them or not. They come from this size, and they have a wrap that you can put on somebody and wrap it around them, and they come in this size. Well, I had this little wound, and here comes Joe up with this big battle dressing. He was going to put it on. I said, hold it right there, stop. We'll forget about that. It was kind of funny, but it wasn't a big deal.
So how is the weather, the mosquitoes, the bugs,
Well, the things you do is you take your clothes, and you have one set of clothes that you wear at night, and you spray them with mosquito repellent. And it smelled like garlic. You could smell it about a mile away. So the mosquitoes weren't really bad. The weather during the monsoon, it was actually cold. You know, Vietnam's warm, and you get a nice tan, and you do all that. But during monsoons, it was kind of miserable out there, and the boats didn't offer a lot of protection from the weather. The other problem we had during monsoons, the people that were supporting us from offshore, we had Coast Guard cutters and destroyers would give us fire support. Sometimes they'd be firing up in the area I was in is the Kamau Peninsula. And it had a thing called the Human Forest, which was triple canopy jungle. It was one of the main transportation routes for the Viet Cong going through that. So there was a lot of ships, and they were doing fire support for Green Berets and Army and everybody. When the monsoon was there and clouds were low, they shoot these munitions that would actually explode, not by hitting the target, by sensing it was close to the target. And sometimes they'd be firing, and some of those things would go off prematurely, like over the river where we were sitting. And the boats didn't really have a lot of armor on top. They weren't designed for that. So that was one of the problems with the monsoons. The other problem is if rains came in, you just might as well sit down and have a cigarette. You couldn't hear or see anything. It would rain that hard. It'd be just sheets of water coming down. But we patrolled regular. It was probably the most challenging job I ever had in the military. It was really a good bunch of people.
So how long did you do that?
I did that for 6 months. I did 4 months as a patrol officer with the Navy, and I did 2 months as an advisor with the Vietnamese Navy. We turned over our boats. I stayed as the advisor. I was the only guy there for a couple of days, and then a couple of guys came back. I worked during this accelerated turnover process. We had trained some of these Vietnamese officers, naval officers, and the Navy guys, and they were good. The Vietnamese, everybody went through the same boot camp, basic training. Then they took the people, the top guys, like went to the Air Force, Navy, Marines, and then the rest of the people became cannon fodder. They went to the Army. So the people we got were pretty good. They could do their job. I had 2 midshipmen that I trained, and we had probably 6 or 8 people on boat crews that worked with our people. And then when we turned the boats over, they brought a Vietnamese lieutenant in who was really an aggressive guy. We had two rivers. We had the Ong Dak River, Song Dak, and then we had a river that was called the South River. It was about maybe a mile down south on the Gulf of Thailand. We had requested a couple of times to let us patrol that river. One of the processes you have to go over there was the district chiefs and all these people have to approve all this, where you're going to operate. They wouldn't let us patrol that river.
This is the Vietnamese district chief.
Yeah. They didn't want us to patrol that river. One of the main Vietnamese transport ports was there was a canal on one side of the river, came from south, or came from the north actually, and it crossed the river, and then there was another canal a little ways down, and it went to a lake we called VC Lake. We couldn't patrol that lake, it was too shallow. It was just a flat body of water. And then from there they could go right up to the district capital, and they used that route. In fact, our group captured 6 sampans full of mail. We compromised the whole VC mail system for that southern part of the delta there with that, which is the officer in charge said we just won him a Legion of Merit when we captured it. And it was up a small canal. We actually went up the canal with 3 boats and 1 boat standing by at the entrance of the canal in support, and we captured 6 sampans off the beach under fire, took the sampans and loaded them on the boats, and actually took the whole sampan and everything out with us. There were 6 of them. And that was their main means of transportation. They didn't, they used sampans. A lot of times they were manually being paddled rather than operated with engines, so we wouldn't hear them.
So when you were on patrol and you saw a sampan,
Oh, we checked them. That was part of our job.
check them all.
We were like traffic cops, if you really want to think about it. Our job was to keep the river open, and I had a good experience and a bad experience. One day I was sitting, sometimes we would just tie up to the bank and we'd call the water taxis and the sampans over and we'd check them out and see it. We were tied up to the bank, and an old man came out in the sampan with a younger man, and he had one of these 1-string like a instrument, and he came out and he was talking, and I could understand some of them, so I got my Vietnamese midshipman that was on the boat with me and asked him what the old man wanted. And he wanted to thank us. He said because since we've been trolling the river, he could take his stuff to market and he wasn't being taxed, and the Army wasn't stealing his food, and he really appreciated our effort, and this was the only way he could repay us. So he played this song, which I thought was, you know, like one of the things, Jesus, you just made my day. Well, the downside was 2 days later, I got one of the fishermen in the river there that knew us, stopped us and said there was a body floating up in this little canal. We went up there and it was the old man. Somebody had killed him probably because he had talked to us and was communicating with us. A lot of our job was just keeping them things open, and not only from the VC, the ARVNs, the Vietnamese Army, would stop these people going to market and steal their food. In fact, at one time I had to stop my sailors from shooting a couple of them, my Vietnamese sailors, when I was an advisor, because there was 2 guys on the bank, 2 Army guys up there pulling the sampans in and taking food off them, and the 2 sailors on my boat wanted to shoot them, and I told them no, we couldn't do that.
These were South Korean soldiers or South Korean soldiers?
South Vietnamese.
Yeah. South Vietnamese.
Yeah. So we just took them in and turned them over to the police, the Vietnamese police, which they probably didn't do anything anyway.
So then what?
Well, I left there. I actually got medevac. I did a stupid thing. I was an advisor, and we had a boat tied up with only 1 engine, and the repair ship a new one had come in. And this guy was a little, I guess he was a little cautious, and he was anchored out pretty far. And when I was on the Garrett County, we went in to the mouth of the river. We were in the river. This guy was out about maybe 5 miles or probably 3 miles in the Gulf of Thailand. And the weather was kind of bad. We had 1 engine. Usually when you go out in bad weather and you go alongside a ship with a boat, they'll make a lee for you. They'll put the ship to the weather side and make a lee that you can come in and tie up and they can hoist you up. Well, for some reason, this guy was having a hard time with this lee, and I was concerned because we only had one engine and the waves were like 8 to 10 foot out there. It's a shallow area and the waves really generate pretty fast. So we tried to go alongside, and the Vietnamese coxswain I had, the boat captain, was doing a really good job. But there was a guy up on the deck, American sailor, and he was bad-mouthing this guy really bad, using derogatory language. And when you work with these people every day, you get a bond. I mean, you know, these guys, you go out with them, you're out there, they depend on you, you depend on them. Well, I kind of lost my temper. And I was going to go up and try to help the guy tying up the boat, and instead of going around the outside, I went around the inside, and the wave come up and smashed the boat up against the ship. Well, I was in between there like a fender, and it actually fractured my pelvis. So I got medevac, and I went to Ben Toohey, which was a Army, kind of like a MASH unit, but they didn't call them that then, they called them something else. Anyway, little experience I had there, after they had x-rayed me and did all their things, the Army doctors, they sent me to an ambulatory ward. Well, I couldn't walk. Okay, I don't know if it was from the shock of the concussion, you know, the thing or what. I couldn't walk. That night, the base got mortar attacked and actually had people inside the fence. And I was laying in bed, and they evacuated the ward, and I couldn't walk. And I was thinking to myself, now, you know something? I've been out there messing around in that river here for 6 months, and here I'm going to lie in bed and some guy's going to come in here and shoot me.
Right.
Well, there was a conscientious corpsman who came through, saw me, I told him what was the problem, and he took me out and took me to the bunker. But that was kind of one of the things. I went from there to Yokosuka, Japan, and when I was in Yokosuka, that was a naval hospital, had 2 SEALs in there with me. One guy had fallen through the floor of a bodega and fractured his ankle, and the other guy had fractured his ankle out on patrol. And their main topic of discussion was the doctors were treating the 2 different. One guy was going to get pins, and the other guy was only in the cast, and that's what they talked about. And we had one nurse that liked to rub your feet, and that was a nightly thing. She'd come through and massage everybody's feet. But the downside, they brought a kid in one night, a Marine, that had been burned over probably 90% of his body. And they had to change his sheets like every 2 hours or so, and when he moved that kid, he just would scream. And that was kind of the downside to that experience. And he actually put him right next to me, and you could smell that burnt flesh.